So we'd like to welcome Lydia back again for another one of her very popular sessions around education healthcare plans. And today Lydia is going to be talking about annual reviews. So I will pass over to you, Lydia.
Thanks, Sally. Please let me know if you can't hear me or see me or anything, and I will do my best to go through uh, what's going to be coming up in the slides and also answer any questions you have. So a summary about me: I'm Lydia Dunford. I'm an associate solicitor at Boys Turner in the education team, and we help parents of children and young people who have special needs, specifically through the EHCP process.
So we have a series of questions. So I'm going to ask Lydia the questions, and then she's going to answer them. And as I say, please do put, if you have questions as we go along, please do put them in the chat, and Janet will answer those. So our first question, the basic one: what is an annual review?
So an annual review, it's a meeting that needs to be held annually, as per the name, as a minimum. It might happen more than once a year. And it's a meeting to discuss the EHCP of the child or young person in question, and it focuses on the needs, so really section B, which is your educational needs, the provision in section F, and then looking to see if they're both still relevant and accurate, and the progress towards the section E outcomes as well, to see how well the child or young person is doing in relation to attaining those outcomes. Like I say, it should happen once a year as a minimum. It's the local authority who have to make sure this happens. It's their responsibility. But they may delegate towards the child's young person's school or college placement to organise instead. And placement is another thing that's also something that can be discussed at annual reviews, whether the placement that is named in the EHCP in section I, is that still relevant and appropriate, or is there a kind of feeling that a different placement might be needed?
So who needs to attend an annual review?
So there's quite a few people who need to at least be invited to attend. There can be differences between those who are invited to those who actually then attend. I'll put this information in the fact sheet as well that will come out afterwards. But essentially the child's parent or young person needs to be invited to attend. The head teacher of the placement the child's at, LA representative in relation of the education. So that's often it could be the caseworker who parents have had contact with before in relation to their child. It might be someone new, but someone from the SEN education team at the LA, someone from health as well, and someone from the LA in terms of social care. And they're the sort of bare minimum invited who need to be invited to attend. But it may be appropriate for others to attend as well. There may be therapists involved with the child already, like speech therapy, occupational therapy, educational psychologists. So it may well be appropriate if they're involved with the child or have written reports to also be invited to attend. And parents can bring legal representation to annual reviews too. They don't have to, but they're allowed to do that if they feel that would help them. If you as a parent are thinking of wanting to bring someone like a solicitor or legal support, it's important to let the person who's organising the review know in good time so they can ensure an invite sent out. They're also provided with copies of the information that's going to be considered.
And what do I need to do beforehand?
So this kind of follows on then from confirming if you want to bring anyone. In a sense of the EHCP itself, it's really looking at the content, so the needs, provision, outcomes, and the placement, and to make sure you're still happy with what it all says. Has anything been updated or changed? Are there any concerns? Is there any updated evidence from any therapists or from other experts that needs to be considered? If you aren't happy with the school that's named and you feel that the placement's broken down or it's not working, do you have information about the other school you're looking for, like an offer of a place, costs, relevant information, because all that needs to go to the local authority to consider. It's also worth bearing in mind, is the case that the school is fine and the problem actually is the fact that the provision in the EHCP isn't quite detailed enough. So that's what the difficulty is, rather than the placement not being suitable. So it's having a look at all of those points really. Anything you do want to put forward to be considered at the review, really do as soon as you've got it available. But the latest is making sure it's gone in at least 2 weeks before the review date. So you'll have confirmation of the review date, normally in fairly good time, but it all needs to be confirmed, people invited 2 weeks before, and the 2 weeks before the review date is also when you have to send anything in, because that's when the school, whoever's organising it, will then send it out to all of those invited to attend. So you don't want to risk something not being included because it's gone in late. You should also make sure that you have everything else rather from anyone else due to attend, and the person organising it should be able to provide that to you, like I say, 2 weeks. Sometimes things may be brought up at the review itself, which is okay if it does, but obviously it does allow less time for everyone to actually consider what's been requested, if there's any changes to the EHCP being sought. It's the ideal, and the reason there are these timings in place under sort of law is to say it should be done in good time. Everyone's had a chance to see it. Everyone can fully consider what they're going to kind of put forward at the review. So it's important to be organised. And if you've got therapists involved, like private therapists, it's often, or treating therapists rather, it's worth preparing for the review kind of fairly on in advance, maybe kind of, a few months ahead of time if they're not already thinking about it, to gather any updated assessments they need to do, any reports they then need to write for the review. It also depends what's in the EHCP as it stands, because often there'll be provision in section F to say what needs to happen before the next annual review. So that will normally account for things like therapists needing to carry out updated assessments, write a report, attend the review. So therapists or people involved should already be aware, as long as that's in the plan. But it's good just to be checking it's all okay, and it is going to happen in time, and nothing will go in late.
So our next question: what should happen afterwards?
So quite a few things need to happen. If you've had the meeting, those who've been invited attend, or they don't have to attend. Obviously, it's ideal if those invited do attend, because you can have a much fuller discussion. The review itself, generally we find that they take about an hour, but that's not set in stone. But the school, whoever's organising the review, normally the school, like the SENCO, will normally run the review and lead it and go through the evidence that's been put forward, other people's views, progress, what are the kind of aims for the next year of the EHCP, what do we want to change in the EHCP, is everything fine? So that's what should happen during the review. So in theory it should be relatively smooth, but it does obviously depend on the issues that are being raised. If everyone's happy with placement and things like that, then that makes things fairly easy going. More time might be needed if you are looking at a change of placement as well. If you go through all of that, then the school, after the review, has 2 weeks from the date of the review to then set out a report, basically pulling together all of the recommendations that are being recommended in any reports, parental views, what the school thinks, bringing it all together, all the evidence that's been sent in for the review. This is then agreed. That has to go to the LA within 2 weeks of the review. The LA then has another 2 weeks, so 4 weeks from the review date in total, to then issue its decision. So this basically then sets out whether they will keep the plan as it is. So they've looked at everything, sent in, they'll go, no, EHCP is fine, we're not going to make any changes. If they propose to amend the plan, or if they propose to actually stop the plan entirely and they feel the child or young person doesn't need the provision anymore. Now that happens regardless or not if the LA actually attends the review, and it's not an uncommon thing for parents to come to us and say, well, local authorities are invited but they never attend. Really, it makes sense for them to attend, but if they don't, they still have to issue a decision within the 4 weeks from the review. So it's not very long. It's not a very long time frame, especially when schools have to get the report in 2 weeks. So they really only have 2 weeks roughly to issue a decision, but that is what the law says. So if that doesn't happen, then really it's a case of following up with the local authority to say that you're over time, evidence was submitted, the report was submitted, regardless of whether they attended the review or not, it doesn't matter. But you still need that decision, because that then dictates what your next options are.
Please feel free, anybody, if you want to put any chats into the chat as we go along, feel free to type them and Janet will answer them.
Mm-hmm.
So
sorry Sally, I was on mute.
Yeah.
There is just one, which is just how long it takes to get the report.
So the school report, so that has to be provided by the school and submitted within 2 weeks of the review, so afterwards. And the school should really send it all out to parents to make sure they're happy with it. But it's just making sure it reflects what was discussed in the meeting and the evidence. Yeah, it should be 2 weeks, and that is a deadline that the school has to meet, or the school has to meet, and then local authority decision is 2 weeks after that.
what happens if they don't meet that deadline?
If they don't, really, it's a case of you follow up with them. You could threaten a complaint. You could threaten to say, well, you're preventing me from actioning next steps. We've put this in time. You haven't adhered to what you need to do in time. So basically following up and writing, threat of a complaint. You could look at judicial review as potentially another option, but that's a bit more, potentially a bit more complicated and more costly. Often something like threatening a complaint may just help to spur things along a bit. So that's really kind of what you can do, and keeping an eye on it. Don't let it kind of just time pass. If you kind of keep regular follow-ups to them, and kind of, you could even say, well, we'll threaten to escalate to your superiors, complaint. You can kind of put all those things in just to see what happens.
Is there any exception then to the 4-week time frame after the annual reviews for the LA?
I'm not aware there is an exception, but I will double check and I can put that in the fact sheet, but I'm not aware there is one. There was a case that happened, I think, a couple of years ago now, actually, but that was basically challenging the timings after annual reviews and local authority decisions. It was more specifically challenging the timings if a local authority proposes to amend an EHCP, because it's slightly different. If they say they're going to stop an EHCP, then they have to do that within 4 weeks of the review, and then you can officially challenge that through an appeal to the Special Educational Needs Tribunal. Same as if the local authority says they're going to keep the EHCP as it is, they'll have the decision and you get another right of appeal to the same tribunal. If, however, the local authority says they're going to keep the plan in kind of in action, but they're going to propose to amend it, that decision in itself doesn't give you a right of appeal. You then have to go through a process, which was the subject of this case a few years ago, which was challenging this timing, about proposed amendment.
So the person who's just entered the room, can you please go on mute? Thank you.
Thanks, Joy.
If they propose to amend the EHCP, that then starts a separate time scale process, which again I can put in the fact sheet for people as well, of kind of back and forth to then get a proposed final EHCP. And it's once you've gone through that process, you then get a final sort of decision letter and a right of appeal. So if they propose to amend a plan that does push things back, the case that happened, I can put the link to the case in case anyone's interested, in the fact sheet, is was looking at whether that should be kind of brought back in line with the 4 weeks rather than giving them extra time to propose changes. It was looking at, well, should it actually all start kind of be done within the 4 weeks? So yeah, I can put that in the fact sheet, because that can, sometimes things can drift in that under the current kind of law. It's a bit vague on how quickly that needs to kind of happen and then be completed. There's some time scales in there, but there are some gaps as well. So that process can take longer. But I suppose the way to look at it as, if you are in that stage and you're going back and forth with BLA and you're hopefully getting those proposed changes you want in the EHCP, and you've got your reports anyway for the review, you're kind of front-loading work you might need to do in an appeal. So you might go through this process, you might get some changes agreed or not. If you then go through that and get a right of appeal, you've then actually covered a lot of what you want to cover already if you've gone back and forth, or you've already got your reports. You say, well, this is what we asked for, they haven't done it, we're still asking for it. So you kind of, you're not necessarily doubling up on work, but you're just doing it at a different stage of the process. I mean, obviously, if there's evidence there that there isn't anything to contradict it, then really the authority should just be agreeing with that and implementing it. But they don't always, and so you do then have to look to challenge them through an appeal.
Okay, you've seen Yeti's response to that, which was why she'd asked the question, is that they're short-staffed, so unable to send any paperwork after the 4 weeks time frame. So,
I mean, short staff isn't a kind of a get-out clause for the legal timeframes for the 4 weeks. You can kind of sympathise a bit, but ultimately they still have a deadline that's there, and they still need to meet that deadline. Like I said, unless there are exceptions in terms of the timings that you're in, but as far as I'm aware, 4 weeks is the 4 weeks. But it's a case of just keeping on at them, I suppose, having written follow-ups with them, so you've got a paper trail always helps, because then you can see how often you've had to chase. Have you had any response at all? If you have they then missed, when they were next due to come back to you, that sort of thing.
Maybe just pointing out that that it's a legal requirement for the timeline might add a little bit of
law. Yeah, exactly. If you just say, well, I know under section what have you of the Children and Families Act, you can kind of, that often is quite useful little tool to
sure.
Okay, I bet it is.
Yeah, because it is just fact then. It's like, well, this is what it is,
Yeah. Okay, so our last question is, what are my options if I don't agree with the local authority's decision following the annual review?
So I'm going to close my window a second. That was, that was kind of just what was covered then about you can appeal. It's when you have that final decision letter, which should come out within the 4 weeks, unless it's a proposal to amend the plan, in which case they still need to write to you, and they'll say what's going to happen next, but it's not a right of appeal then. So yeah, an appeal is to the Special Needs Tribunal. They are separate from the local authority, and there's then a formal process to go through if you want to appeal. There's certain requirements, there's paperwork you have to complete. But like I was saying, often you've already got your evidence there. If you've asked for changes to the EHCP, but the local authority hasn't agreed, if you've already got your reports and information for the review, you're then already just set to put that forward for an appeal. You might need some updated evidence depending on how things progress, but generally that's a good base to get you going. It also depends on what's not agreed, because if placement wasn't agreed, if you asked for a change of school but the LA has said no, then again it's making sure you've got that evidence you want. Make sure that goes in. If not, you make sure you get it in as soon as possible once the appeal is lodged and registered. If you are looking to challenge the school named, a general sort of requirement is that you have confirmation that you've told them you want to go for the school, you want them named, you've got an offer of a place. The tribunal needs to see that, because they know then, right, this is, the school is aware that they are being put forward. but then there's more information you need to put forward for an appeal as well to challenge placement. So it does depend, but hopefully, you know, it all depends on the evidence you've got for the review. Hopefully if the LA considers it, accepts it, there's nothing to contradict it, that might be enough and you might not have to appeal. But unfortunately appeals are there as an option, and quite often parents do have to go through that. It doesn't always mean that an appeal goes through the whole way though. A lot of appeals can, depending on the situation, can get resolved without having to go to a final hearing. But it's sometimes just having the appeal option as a safety net, even if you just carry on discussions with the local authority and you can get it sorted. But having that right of appeal there is just good to have as a backup, just in case.
Sure. Once the EHCP has been approved, who should receive a copy and how long should that take to receive?
So I'm guessing this means after the review, so it should be 4 weeks. So if this is that what you, it might not be that, so apologies if not. And yeah, please do just let me know if it's not. But if after a review an EHCP has proposed changes put forward, and the LA then agrees to that process, like I say, there is then a separate kind of time scale process to then go back and forth, get the EHCP amended. I can put that in the fact sheet because it's quite sort of wordy. And then that should go, any final EHCP needs to go to parents, to the school that's named in the EHCP. Local authority will send the copy so they'll have it. It's not uncommon, and we do this often, to ask for a copy to go to us as solicitors if we're instructed on behalf of parents too. And then anyone else, sometimes it might go to health or social care if they're involved as well, but they should, at the bottom of the letter, they should list who it's going to go to as well, but parents, school as a minimum.
Can you challenge the child home provision provided by social services?
So you can challenge, so social care provision is section H of an EHCP, and the needs are section D. So yes, you can challenge that as well at review if they are, if they're concerns that it's not appropriate or suitable. The same sort of process would apply. You look to get updated evidence. Sometimes independent social workers are needed. It depends on what's available. So yeah, you can ask for requested changes to that, and again, the local authority would need to consider, decide if they accept the change you're seeking or not. Any reasons they can provide for why they don't agree with them. And then if you get an EHCP at the end of the review process that doesn't have the social care provisional changes you were looking for, then you can appeal that to the tribunal as well. The only difference is you can only ask for non-binding recommendations. You can't ask for an official legal decision from the tribunal. They can only make non-binding recommendations. And I think we've done a webinar before on this, as possibly, so it'll be there. But yes, you can challenge, same process. It wouldn't be a legally binding decision at the end of it, is the only thing.
Okay. Thank you. What happens if a young person has no placement for the next academic year?
It depends on when your review was. If you've had a review and waiting for a decision, they're making sure that happens within the times. If you've not had a review, you can ask for an urgent review, an interim review if actually there's no decision. It does depend on what stage you're at. There should be a placement aid named if the EHCP's in place, but that there has been delays or whatever, what have you, then you need to try and get yourself into a situation to challenge that. So that's really through an appeal. If you've got, say, an EHCP that doesn't name a placement, which they can do, they could just name a type. I don't obviously know the specifics of this, but if it's the placement's name isn't suitable, so parents aren't going to send the child there, then again, is there another option to put forward? But it's really a case of getting into a position where you've got the final plan, you then know what you're dealing with, and then getting either an annual review, or if you've just had one, going to appeal afterwards if you need to. But that might be one to get more sort of specific advice on, because obviously it might depend on the details of where you're at.
No more questions.
No.
So can I just ask, Lydia, are reviews always face-to-face, or can they be online?
They used to be face-to-face, but since COVID and really after, kind of now, they're remote. I've been to, I had one in June that was remote, and that worked absolutely fine. Yeah, I think really it depends on what works best for everyone. If everyone's happy to meet in person and prefer, then yeah, makes sense. But if you've got it where it saves on having to travel, or you've got other things going on, then it makes things easier to be able to attend remotely, and I think they work fine. I don't think there's any problems with them, but it's probably just personal preference.
I have one more from Yeti. I had a placement named, but it's an all-boys school for my daughter. So am I able to appeal based on this? My daughter has no placement.
That's really weird that they would name an all-boys school. So if you're looking, if it's to do with a placement for this September, it wouldn't be resolved by September, purely because if you get into an appeal situation, appeals can last up to about 7 months from being registered to a final hearing. Sometimes they can get pushed back, and we've had that as well, where we've gone to tribunal and lodged appeals and said this is to do with placement for September, and you still get a hearing date months after, or kind of going into the new year. It's just what the tribunal has available. Yeah, it's difficult to say, because I don't know obviously if you're in time to appeal, because that's the other thing. Once you have your final decision letter, you've got an initial 2 months window, which you can then extend by a further month to appeal. So I don't know if you're in time. Like I say, if it's to do with September, then really it's looking at what other options can be put in place in the interim. It's the local authority who are responsible for. Oh, right. So you were saying you are in time to appeal.
Yes, right. Okay.
Like I said, you can lodge an appeal, but a hearing. We're getting hearing dates now for about March being lodged, so a tribunal wouldn't be able to hear anything. Very unlikely hear anything this time this year. That you could do an appeal, but alongside it would be a case of corresponding to the local authority and saying what the problem is, which is a very simple problem, as in it's a school for boys and you have a daughter.
Yeah, seems ridiculous.
That's just, I've never come across that before. That's so odd. But putting it all back on them, because they have a duty to make sure if she's of compulsory school age, that she's getting suitable education that is full time, if she can manage that. So putting it back on them and saying, well, I can appeal this because I don't agree that the school is suitable because it's a boys' school. But in the meantime, you need to provide something. They have a legal duty to provide full-time education if a child's out of school for a reason. Yeah. So I'm just checking, when you say appeal, is it an EHCP you've got rather than a secondary admission appeal, because they are different? Is it?
EHCP.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like I say, appeal is one option. It won't be resolved until next year. I mean, again, it depends on if you've got another school to put forward. It's something it's probably worth, if you want more kind of advice, it'd be worth contacting me afterwards, because it is quite case specific. I'm conscious there are other questions, but you have options. They just aren't quick fixes, unfortunately.
I attended a review that was by telephone conference, and this really didn't work well, as people were talking over each other, and the school insisted it could only be 45 minutes. So it was very rushed. Can the parents refuse so that they could do it, as a face-to-face in the future?
Yeah, I think if you have problems with it and you don't feel everything's covered, then yeah, raise it as a concern. I mean, when I've had remote reviews, they've been done over Zoom or Teams, so you can still see people. I can imagine over telephone that's probably hard.
Yeah.
You can't kind of keep track on who's saying what. So yeah, I'd seen Zoom or Teams. Work, yeah, I put those are good options if people don't want to travel. Otherwise, yeah, if you really prefer in person, say that. But yeah, stressed if you don't feel everything was covered and if you found it difficult, because it is meant to be a chance when everyone attending can have their say, especially parents or the young person. Yeah, so just you can raise that as a concern. Telephone is odd. I mean, yeah, we've been on Zoom and Teams for so long over COVID.
Yeah,
It was the
sure.
norm to have that for meetings now. So yeah.
So could you ask to have another annual review then, if you didn't feel that it was covered, or you just
Well,
for next time?
Yeah, that doesn't
you
seem
could
right.
try. There's nothing to stop. You could try and say that you don't feel it was kind of sort of fully kind of covered everything it needed to. Um, I suppose the thing with reviews is it's part of it is having the discussion in person, or however, but it is also then looking at the written evidence. So it's kind of a balance of, if you've got the good written evidence but the in-person bit didn't quite go as well as you couldn't cover everything, does the written evidence cover what you wanted to say anyway? Will that
Sure.
will still be considered? If not, if it really was based on what was going to be discussed, then you could push it back and say, can we have just a follow-up from the review, not even like a full review, just to kind of just to wrap things up. And if there's specific points you feel you weren't addressed, then maybe that's helpful to say what wasn't covered, because others might feel the same. You don't know, they might have all felt a bit put out by it.
Doesn't sound ideal.
No, it doesn't.
No.
We have one more question. Can the parents of the child request the social services to attend the annual review because of home provision issues provided by social services?
Yes, so social services, that they are, someone from social care should be invited to attend, especially if there is social services provision already in place. It makes absolute sense, because they should be providing updated evidence and input for the review. The thing is, there's kind of, you can ask. It really comes down to whether the person or persons actually then do just attend. If they don't, there's not really much you can sort of do that I'm aware of. You can kind of sort of stress that you really feel that they should be there because they're already involved, or you want them to be involved, or there's already provision. But ultimately, if they don't, that's kind of what you've got to go on and say, well, we asked, or the school asked, or whoever asked. And then again, it's relying on having good written evidence as well. If in the absence of therapists or professionals not being there.
So we have no more questions.
Oh,
yes, we do. Can I please ask one more? Thanks, Claire. What are the parents' rights if the school are not meeting the provisions stated in the EHCP? That's a good question.
So that is a good question. So it's important to remember that while a school is named in the EHCP, they are responsible for the provision, but the body who's ultimately responsible is the local authority. So you have to look at, well, what's the issue first with the provision? Is it the school doesn't have enough resources? Well, they need to take that to the local authority, because if they're doing all they can but they need another TA, they don't have enough funding or what have you. Is it the fact that that would be one thing, is that the provision is clear but the school doesn't have the resources to actually deliver it? The other option it could be is that the provision actually isn't worded very well, so it's not clear what has to be provided, and that can sometimes cause difficulties, because you may have provision for regular adult support to help with attention skills or something, whereas one person could say, well, that will be a TA, that's one-to-one, but actually the school may go, well, no, it doesn't say a TA, it doesn't say one-to-one, we've got an adult in the class, they help when they can, and that would probably arguably be sufficient to meet that provision. But if you've got provision that says 20 hours of one-to-one TA support with a TA who's experienced in whichever needs during structured lesson times, that is very clear what has to happen. And if that's not happening, it's much easier to say, right, well, this should be happening, why isn't it? And it's checking with the school first, because if you can get from them what's the problem, especially if the provision is clear, then it's like, go to the local authority and say, this needs to be happening. If it's a case that the provision isn't worded well, then that's something that's not the school's fault. That's on the local authority again. So you'd have to raise that at an annual review and say, right, the provision needs to be updated because it's not clear, it's not specified. Therefore, it's unclear how it can be delivered or if it's being delivered. So it always goes back to the local authority, and then the local authority has a legal duty to make sure the provision is being delivered. Like I say, the provision needs to be clear, so you know actually it has to be delivered. If it's vague, it's much more difficult to enforce. But there are legal options to challenge the local authority if they don't input provision. You can complain. Judicial review is another one, and they are quite common complaints that end up going to the local government ombudsman, where local authorities haven't implemented Section F provision in the EHCP and they have a legal duty to do so. So, you know, those are your options really.
I wonder if the next one, hi Farak, you came in just at the very, we're just sort of coming to an end now. So, and it sounds quite sort of case specific. So I wonder if it is a question for after for Lydia to answer for you.
I think so. To do a specific, specific questions. Yeah, I think that's quite specific. So
if you don't mind, Farak, we will put Lydia's details. It will all be there, and it will also be in the fact sheet. So if you do have, you know, a much more specific question, you can put that directly to Lydia. Okay. From Sam, can parents request a postponement of the annual review meeting if the case manager or specialist teachers are unable to attend and parents feel their presence is necessary?
Yeah, I think that would be sensible. If you've got a date, it really depends on what usually it's the school organising the reviews, but whoever it is, explaining to them to say why you feel they need to attend. If everyone else who's invited to attend agrees, I don't imagine that'd be a significant problem. You know, ultimately, once the date is set, the invite is sent out for people to attend. They don't have to attend, but obviously it's preferable if people go who you feel will be necessary to contribute to points. So you can certainly ask for it. It's worth thing to bear in mind really is, and this is something the local authority might kind of object to, is you have got to have the review within a year of the last review. So if you got a review and then you say push it back, and that actually then means it's past a year, you could be, you know, a local authority could be technical and say, well, that's not that you've missed your, you know, we have to make sure it happens within a year, and we don't, you know, that, you know, if we pushed it back, that wouldn't happen. Whether that would actually be an issue, I don't know. It depends, but it also depends on what kind of delay you're looking at. Because I agree, it does make sense to have a review. They only happen once a year, in theory. It makes sense to have all the people there who really need to be there. Otherwise, potentially things aren't addressed, which you feel need to be. But yeah, so you can certainly ask, but you may not. I think it would depend on the situation.
Oh, lovely, thank you. And there are no more questions, and Lydia's email address is up on the chat.
That's great, thank you. Thank you very much, Lydia. That was again another very useful one. Janet and I are always like, oh, this is great. We've just learned so much more about EHCPs.
I have to go away and process it.
Process it all. But yeah, they're always very helpful, and I hope people watching find it helpful. But thank you very much. Lydia has kindly also does fact sheets for these sessions. So what we'll do is that when we've done the recording and then we've done the editing and the fact sheet, we'll email those out to anybody who signed up for this. And I'll also put a link into the other sessions that Lydia has done, which are all online on our website, because there's a lot of different sessions that Lydia has been through all around EHCPs. So there might be some people watching that miss some of the others, and you can either watch the recording or you can have a look at the fact sheet. So hopefully that will be very useful.
Do people get sent the recording, Sally? Somebody's just
they get sent a link to the recording. It does normally takes me probably about a week to kind of get it together, because obviously we're quite busy, but I try and get it out as quickly as possible and uploaded. But within the week it would be up online, and we'll email everybody who signed up with a link and with the fact sheet as well.
great. And lots of thank yous coming through from you, Lydia.
Yes, well, there we are. Yeah.
Pleasure.
That's brilliant. So yeah, that's the address for our webinars. If you want to just have a look at some of the other ones that Lydia has done all around webinars. And yeah, super. Well, thank you very much again, Lydia. And I hope that was useful for everybody. And we hope to not actually see you, because obviously we don't actually see you, but we hope that you can join us again for future webinars. She says, hoping that Lydia will do future webinars. Super. And anybody who has signed up, then we will sort of keep in contact with you and let you know when future webinars are coming up as well. Super. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And yep, we will hopefully see you soon. Bye for now.
Bye, guys.